covered under that grant? It just, as far as I can see, it just says that it's for rehabilitation projects.
Yeah, it was very vague unless you really dove into it, and I didn't. If you guys had no interest in even trying to pursue that, I wasn't going to spend the time trying to find those details for you. But
there's grant money available for it, then
it's just a matter of who's going to administer it, who's going to be enforcing it, and everything like that. And it's really not.
I didn't know if there was already a list of projects, priority projects, or things that are out there that are top of mind for this commission.
What about the possibility of saying whether we could write a grant for the DDA to sort of beef up their facade rehabilitation project? They have very, very little money in that account right now, like maybe $10,000 a year, which doesn't go very far.
Looks like it's used.
I don't know whether that's possible or not, the way the grant applications go, but if that were done, then there's, you have the DDA and their administrators could administer the grant, and I don't know. Could maybe talk to Christina and Mark Miller about that.
Yeah, it says to rehab commercial, public, or nonprofit properties in the downtown areas in Michigan. So I would think that would qualify.
Yeah, but the problem with that is that we don't really have the ability to administer a grant like that. So we would have to find somebody who would be able to do it. And because the DDA already has a project like that, which is woefully underfunded, it might be a way that we could maybe do something.
Yeah, I'd be happy to get Mark kind of aware of this and see where he stands and kind of try and connect you guys. That's no problem.
Yeah.
So there was that. I guess I'll just go through this other stuff and then we'll let Lisa take over here in a minute. But in previous meetings, you guys had asked for updates on what Ed's doing over on his property at 100 Washington. So he gave his update there, included the letter that he sent to you guys, and then he's got a rendering of what he was after there. And I saw that, and I knew for sure you guys wanted to get eyes on it, because I'm no expert, but I wouldn't call that very historic. So.
Well, he doesn't have a current application in.
Right, he still has to re-administer for that, but he was giving an update, or he has to reapply for that. But it's just that was his update until he got to that point. So he was aware that he needed to reapply, and we're still waiting on that application from him. But in the meantime, this is what he sent us. So how you guys want to handle it.
That may not be as bad a historic restoration as you think it is, because I used to be a car dealership, and
oh, did it?
I know I never saw it when it was a car dealership, so I don't know what it was originally. Mark might know. He might have some pictures of that, and been around long.
It was originally built as a car dealership in 1950.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that pretty much
and
1950 building.
Yeah, what it looks like now is very similar to what it looked like in 1950.
Yeah.
Well, that's why you guys are the
At
experts.
any rate, I don't see that there's anything that we can do with that, because there's no current application.
Right. And then the last thing I had for you guys, situated here. So Joe Mathewson at 435 River put up some windows that he asked Mark to sign off on, and Mark wanted to make sure that everybody saw them before any action was taken.
What is 435 River?
That is the former Scottsville Variety Store.
Oh,
Let me just give you a quick little background. Joe Mathewson, who has the upholstery shop, he had a store for many years near where Goodies is now, just right down the street from Goodies. And probably about 5 or 6 years ago, he went through the entire process with the Historic District Commission to fix up his building. He did a wonderful job on it. He's got the only remaining original awning from River Street on the building, and he redid it and so on and so forth. Turned out great, but he went through the entire Historic District Commission process to try to get things done correctly. And last August, as I was walking into the museum or walking out of the museum, I noticed that there were in the rear of the building, which would be on the Oak Street side, because that building extends from River Street all the way to Water Street. So along Oak Street, there are these openings where there used to be windows and doors originally. And John Smith, who was the owner of the variety store, he boarded those up and painted them black and looks pretty shabby. But as I was walking out of the museum, I noticed that someone between 10 and 4 o'clock had put in these kind of cheap looking windows and then kind of used insulating tape to kind of tape them up around so, no air would get through. Kind of shabby looking, I think. I contacted Mike about it, and Mike, because Joe had never come and given an application. There was no notification that he was going to do anything, no work, nothing. And Mike contacted George Saylor, and George, they went around a little bit, and George basically said that at the time that an application came forward, it would probably be the best way to figure out what we want to do, whether it has to go back to what it was before, or they would be fine the way they are. And now he's putting an application in, and I just, looking at them and how they are, I mean, there's not a lot that we can really do now. But gosh, they look pretty darn shabby, and look pretty cheap. And so I just wanted to know or wonder what the groups or the commission's thoughts were on it. And of course, you would probably have to see them if you don't know what I'm talking about before I signed off on it.
Yeah, so this kind of, as I was going through the bylaws, enforcement is difficult, to say the least, with the way we're set up. And there's no after the fact permitting, fines or anything like that set up right now. So I don't know. I think it would probably be easier for us to work out some sort of after the fact permit and penalize that way. Lisa, you might be able to help us with this a little bit too, but I think that would probably be our easiest move because the enforcement is a difficult aspect for us. I'll have to talk to George on what exactly I'm, allowed to do within changing those bylaws and things like that. But if that's what you guys want to do, that's a move forward. I can start that process and see where it lands.
Matheson might be difficult to deal with. I know that on his other building, it was pulling teeth to get him to make an application and to go. Mark is laughing there because he knows what it is.
Yeah, I am, because you're right.
But I think we should try something. Let's see what we do. See if there's a way we can remedy the situation.
And
go ahead.
Well, one of the issues is that even if we move forward and we do get these after the fact permit, if we get this set up, we can't really do anything to him. Because this has already happened. It can't retroactively start penalizing him.
Yeah, except maybe we can convince him that he should try harder.
Well, technically, he's already got a violation. It's like he's violated the ordinance, right? So he has a violation and the violation has to be remedied.
Mhm.
And, the laws evolve. Here in New York, we have the same issues where something, they might not have been able to enforce a remedy when it happened, but, 20 years on, a new owner buys the building and they discover that there's a violation on the building and they can't make any changes. They can't get a building permit until they remedy the violation. So that is one tool. He can never get another building permit
Mm.
unless he remedies this violation. So even though it's not currently explicitly spelled out in the ordinance right now, ordinances change. And so, the the cure to violation section can be updated in the ordinance. So that makes it clearer to somebody who has a violation, how do you cure the violation? Because if it's not really spelled out, then it's, then people get frustrated. But that could be an area of improvement where, if there's a violation on the building, it's issued to the building and that transfers from owner to owner. If you ever want another building permit, you have to remedy your violation. But that takes coordination with the building department, which I don't know if that exists in Manistee or not.
It's contracted out to Safe Built currently. And I work with Steve a lot, and he actually told was it Joe? He told Joe, this isn't gonna fly. You need to talk to the HDC. And it's funny that you guys mentioned you've dealt with him before, because he's acted like this is the first time. So yeah.
So moving forward, well, I mean, should we just approve it for the time being, and maybe like Lisa said, try to work toward, because that's a good idea. I mean, try to work toward, well, hey, until this is but then if we approve it, how can we not provide him another certificate of appropriateness? You know what I mean? So what's the best course of action, do you think?
Well, I correct me if I'm wrong, Lisa, but I don't think we should be issuing a certificate of appropriateness for something that we're not comfortable with.
Okay, and then so what do we tell him then?
But who issues violations?
So
that's my question.
So in I don't know if Zach, you've got a chance to forward all the handouts that I sent along last night or not?
We sent them. I'm not sure if everybody was able to open them or not.
Okay, well, there's one PDF in there that is the codified ordinance for the Historic District Commission, in case you guys don't have it. And it says that the commission may seek an order from the circuit court to require the owner to restore the resource to its former condition. So there is some leverage that you can go to the building owner and say, you have a violation. We can take you to court, or you can fix it, and try to maybe reason with them that way and be like, these windows are not exactly appropriate. We're not saying you can't put windows here, but let's get you windows that actually fit the building. That's all we're asking. Unfortunately, he's already forked out money for windows, but he did it at his own risk, fully knowing that he was in a historic district.
And the other problem with that being, it's been a blighted property, if I'm not mistaken. So it's like, is any fix better than no fix? Kind of, Mark and I were kind of talking about. It doesn't look great. I don't know.
Where do you draw the line
more
at that?
coming to fix it. What was that?
So just like, I'm sorry I interrupted you, Zach, but like we were just talking, where do you draw the line?
Mm-hmm.
So what might be a reasonable kind of compromise at this point in time is that a violation is issued and it's tied to the building, it's tied to the DOB permits, it's tied to the property, like all of the city records on the property. It has a violation. So anytime, you can tell him, if you ever try to sell this property, the next building owner is going to have this violation on them, and it might be difficult for you to sell this building because they won't be able to get a building permit. So you can kind of explain it to him and be like, we'll let you have this violation currently. We'd like you to address it. We understand you have a lot of things on your plate right now to, address with this building to get it watertight. you made a mistake, but we're not going to immediately penalize you for that. So that way it kind of, he's aware, he's been on notice, been put on notice that there's a problem here and we're not cool with it, but we're gonna let you get a little bit down the road to make this building safer. And before you proceed with any more work, you need to have a building permit that has gone through HDC review and includes a master plan for the replacement of these windows. So we want a timeline of when you're going to replace them. And we want to see that you've planned for it, you know, so it's some accountability has been taken there.
Yeah, that seemed, I mean,
That sounds like a good strategy, and I think I would certainly support that. I'm not sure we can take that action since we don't have any quorum, but I don't know whether somebody could informally explain the situation to him, and the next HDC meeting that we have a quorum, we can request the city attorney to issue a violation and go through the process.
well, and he's already reached out to me, I think twice today, asking if the meeting has been held and where it's at. So I can reach out to him and just kind of tell him, hey, you're not getting your COA today, and kind of give him a rough idea of what we've been discussing. But yeah, outside of that, I think having the quorum decide, like moving forward with, okay, we want the master plan of what the rest of the work is going to be. That I think is going to require a quorum. Am I wrong there, Lisa?
Yeah, I, you know, and it could just be like, if he can put together, I mean, like you said, is this the old Rosemaryk's building? Is this my dad's?
No,
Or no? Oh, no, wait, this is
no,
the Scottville Variety building, you said.
yeah, Lisa, this is Scottville Variety. Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
that's another building that has problems.
Yeah.
Down the other end of the street.
That's a whole other tale.
So yeah, I think you probably do require a quorum for it to move in a formal manner, but
I can let him know that he's not getting a COA and kind of tell him why. And I don't think that's inappropriate.
Just tell them the process of what we're going to go through.
Yeah. But with that, I guess I'll leave it to Lisa to kind of run through. I'm sorry if I didn't introduce you, Lisa.
oh, no worries.
I'll let you do, because I'm sure you know your expertise better than most. So go ahead, tell us all about it.
I'm Lisa, born and raised in Manistee, and I'm an architect. I'm a state of Michigan licensed architect, and I'm currently living in Brooklyn, New York. And basically, historic preservation has been my entire career. So for the last 20 years, I've practiced basically nothing but historic preservation architecture. I sat on the Historic District Commission for the City of Ann Arbor. And I also wrote the permit application guide for the City of New York for their Landmarks Preservation Commission. So I also have submitted a number of historic tax credit projects with the state of Michigan when I worked at Quinn Evans in Ann Arbor. So I'm very familiar with historic preservation regulation. It's kind of my niche little segment that I fall into that I kind of geek out over. So I'm more than happy to help you all because I love my hometown. I love to see it thrive and grow and maintain its historic heritage. It's very important to me. So thank you for having me. And so I can share my screen with you. Let's see which one is it gonna.
Yeah, I think I made you co-host, so you should be able to.
Let's see. Zoom is not giving me any previews of the windows. So this is gonna, you have to let me know. Oh, now they want my system preferences. Oh dear. Um,
You want me to try again here?
hang on one moment. See if they let me do this. Okay.
There we go.
All right, so, oops, we'll back up. This is my first time doing a Google presentation, so hopefully this goes okay. So this is just kind of a brief overview today of how to regulate historic districts. We'll talk so that everybody gets on the same page. You know, what is a historic district? Why is historic preservation important? Some of the economic and social benefits. So when you're out in the community and representing the commission, you and people, you know, you may get into a dialogue with somebody about the historic district, then you're kind of armed with some tools about why it's so important. Then we'll kind of go over like your role as a commissioner, a review of Manistee's historic resources, because Manistee actually has quite a few historic resources that are listed, which the commission is responsible for. We'll do a quick review of the Secretary of Interior standards. Some of them are very cut and dry, other ones are a little bit more gray. So we'll probably spend a little bit more time on examples with those. Then we'll do a brief overview of kind of like, you know, examining an application, which you guys are all kind of familiar with, but just a good kind of overview. Challenging issues. So again, like the violations, demolition by neglect, and then we'll wrap it with stewardship and community, and then we'll have questions. So hopefully this will go pretty quick. I only have like 16 slides. 14 of actually have content on them. So briefly, you know, what is a historic district? So historic districts and designation was set up by the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966. So in that, they've defined it as a geographically definable area. So basically what it boils down to is that you can have a large district or a small district, and how many resources in that district can vary. So your district could contain buildings, it could have a site, it could be a structure, an object. The Ramsdell, even though it's an individual landmark, it still has a district. So anything within the boundaries of that district falls under the review of that application. An example of a site and object would be the Orchard Beach State Park Historic District, which, you know, the park itself is a site. Objects within the park, which may be surprising, the drinking fountains are actually historic, according to the designation report. And then the structure, example of a historic structure in Manistee is the city of Milwaukee. So that is also listed as a historic resource. And so regulation is actually very important of historic districts, because historic preservation as an act is I find a very patriotic duty, because you're protecting our national heritage, the good, the bad, the ugly. On some level, we need that kind of rolling record of our history, so we don't repeat the bad and the ugly, and we kind of build upon the good and move forward. So it's you know, the stewardship of these historic resources. It is a community effort. Our built environment belongs to the community, even though individual properties may be, you know, held privately or, you know, through government or whatever entities. Our built environment affects the community around. So, you know, access to light and air, which is, you know, general building department kind of topic, but also the character of our spaces impacts your mood and your general disposition. So the NHPA of 66 recognizes that there's a protection of spirit and direction of our nation. The cultural and historic foundations are very important to the American public, and that we have to protect these irreplaceable heritage resources. Historic preservation makes so much sense in so many levels, because there are so many economic and social benefits of preservation, of which Manistee greatly benefits from heritage tourism. And every time the historic districts or the historic resources are chipped away at, their character defining features, a bit of that dies. So it does impact the bottom line of heritage tourism, which is an extremely large industry in the state of Michigan. In the packet you have, there are a few economic studies on how the impacts of historic preservation have had on the state of Michigan as a whole. So you can kind of get a little more of a granular breakdown there. It also stabilizes property values, and many times you see property value growth. It creates jobs because in preservation, the majority of the effort is spent on labor versus materials. So in new construction, you basically have like 50% new material, 50% labor. In historic preservation, I believe it's skewed more 70% labor, 30% materials. And so those dollars that are spent paying your labor are immediately reinvested into your community. So it's important to try to find laborers or construction companies based within your community, because you'll see that economic return far greater than new construction. So preservation maintains neighborhood character, which I think we all understand, conserves resources, which is so important right now because of global warming, and trying to preserve, our natural resources that our planet has. And so when the greenest building is the one that's already built. So you're not certain that this kind of goes onto a rabbit hole of embodied energy and how much energy it takes to produce a brick. And so you've already got that baked into the equation. And so you have a greater starting point, and there's less materials and less waste and preservation jobs. So it attracts investments. People love beautiful buildings, and older buildings tend to be a little bit more beautiful than buildings you see going up right now, because there is greater attention to care and detail when those buildings may have been built. And then it also creates and maintains affordable housing. And there have been studies that have been done that in historic districts and historic preservation, the areas that have historic districts, the rents are more stabilized. You don't see them fluctuating like you do in areas that have like new apartment buildings. So, and then additionally, I feel like the tax credits are incredibly important. Right now, the state of Michigan is going through a whole restructuring of the historic tax credit program. So that is changing and in flux right now, but we still have the commercial and it's the commercial federal tax credits. Usually state programs have a commercial and a residential component to it. So we'll see what they end up coming up with right now. And then there's grants that are typically available, like we were just discussing before this meeting. So as a commissioner, I think my children just came home, so I apologize if there's gonna be screaming in the background. So your role as a commissioner is extremely important, because historic preservation begins at a local level, and the most powerful level of enforcement is at the local level. At the state and federal level, the enforcement really isn't very strong unless you're using public money to do the work. And so at that point, it goes through a Section 106 review at the state or federal level. But if there isn't any federal money being used or any government money being used on a project, it doesn't see that state or federal level review. So the level of review at the local level is extremely important to be very strong and vibrant, and you're a key component in that enforcement of preservation review in Manistee. So you're a steward of that. As part of your role, you're deliberating over the applications. And so, you're playing this role as a stopgap to, like, just as we were talking before this presentation, the windows went in. And so while recognizing that buildings continue to evolve, take a moment, let's figure this out. Let's do this the right way instead of proceeding down this path of bad, like not permitting windows that may be inappropriate, but working with that building owner in the future to say, you know, these are the type of windows that are appropriate for this building. And, you know, when you get to that project, this is what we want you to install. So that is a brief overview of your role. And so in the city of Manistee, there are 11 historic resources. And I feel like there could be so many more because I feel like there could be a huge residential historic district if anybody ever wanted to do that. Because it's just amazing. But so we've got, you know, the city of Milwaukee is actually a National Historic Landmark, which is the highest level of designation that we have in the United States, which is quite impressive. But any of these buildings you see here on the list, you should be receiving applications for whenever there is proposed work on these buildings. I don't know if the building owners are aware of that, but it might be worth dropping them a note to say, hi, we're your Historic District Commission, and, you know, let us know when you have any updates.
Actually, Lisa, if I could break in a minute, most of those buildings that are listed there, with the exception of the Central Business District, aren't under our purview, because this historic district is only the business district downtown. So we don't have much to say about the Babcock House or the.
Well, it's so this is where I sent this question in the trap to Zach, and because according to the city ordinance, the city may by ordinance establish one or more historic districts, and the Historic District Commissions shall be administered, or historic district shall be administered by the Historic District Commission. So technically, under the legal definition of a historic district, all of these structures are a historic district. So because a district can be one building, it's a definable boundary. And so every single one of these properties, when you look up the nomination for it, it asks what are the district's boundaries. And then that's mapped out according to global coordinates. So, you know, I think it makes sense to take a proactive stance on these properties. You know, I many years ago did an existing condition study of Guardian Angels Church, and there's some very inappropriate mortar that was used on that building and a lot of caulk in place of mortar. And so I think to have a set of eyeballs on these very valuable structures to the city of Manistee is not a bad thing. So I guess, you know, something to consider, but these are the listed resources in the city.
Well, that definitely is something that we'll have to look at, because it's always been our understanding when I was have been on the historic district, that it only was a defined area in the downtown area. So maybe we're making a lot more work for you, Zach. But that's something that I think we should actually look into, because it probably would be interesting to have a body that was overlooking these that's local, because as far as I know, there hasn't been in the past. Guardian Angels application was submitted to us as a courtesy, but we never saw that as something that we had any authority to make any decisions on, but maybe I'm wrong about that.
Is that something that should be floated by the city attorney for clarification?
I think so.
And Lisa, if I might, this is actually my first meeting with this. So some of the terminology and things I'm learning. And so when you say they're historic resources, how do you define resources? What does that mean?
So the resource can be actually, we can float back a couple of screens here. So resource is a building, a site, structure, or object.
So interchangeable with district?
They are in the district.
Okay,
So, and the district has the defined boundaries according to its National Register nomination.
oh, okay. So lot lines or within a order of a lot if it was a building, or
Right. So, for
the
example,
district would be the lot and then the resource would be the building maybe, or am I thinking of that correctly?
here, let me see if I can pull up. Can you see this National Register nomination on my screen?
I can.
Okay. So this is for Orchard Beach State Park. And within, within the district of Orchard Beach State Park, they're defining it, they have it checked off as a district. But there's 4 contributing buildings, 5 sites, 8 structures, 20 objects, so a total of 37 contributing resources to this property. And if you go down further, so there's narrative generally, and they list out all the things. Let's see, where is, so you can see where it, what the district boundaries look like. There's always a lot of, okay, so here's the geographical data. And so typically the state has somebody in the SHPO's office that fills in the UTM references. There's a USGS map that's included. That's a part of the description.
Okay.
So whenever you submit even, let's see, some of the older nominations aren't as well done, but that's what the Ramsdell says. The newer nomination forms are typically much better in terms of a lot more detail.
Thank you, I appreciate it. Zach can attest, I ask a lot of questions, so any resources I can get my hands on that I can read. I'm a little nutty about historic preservation. So.
No, that's great. I love it. If you ever have any questions, feel free to email me or whatever, because I went to college for this and on top of architecture school. So I really do enjoy it and love it very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so this is Ramsdell Theater. So you can see the forms evolve over time and typically have different kind of content sometimes, but for the most part, it's all the same. You know, description of the resources on the building.
Survey.
Always a map that's included that defines the boundaries. Whoa, church popped up. So all of these are included in the link that I sent to Zach, and he should forward to you.
Yeah, I got it. They just sent it.
Okay. So if you have any questions,
Hey,
let me know.
Lisa, I have a quick comment. This is Mark, by the way. Quick comment. About a year or so ago, there was an issue brought up to the Historic District Commission about the benches at the Ramsdell, and they were painted by some students from area elementary schools. And I sent this to the Historic District Commission for this very reason that Lisa's mentioning, is that the areas in and around these historic buildings and benches and fountains and all this other stuff are a part of that whole area, correct, Lisa?
That's correct. Yes.
Yeah. And that's just a side note to what you were saying. Is that's the reason why I did that, is because some people, I won't mention, but some people didn't like that I had to give the okay to the historic district. The historic district had to give the okay before that could happen, and that's the reason why that was done. And a lot of people, like you mentioned, Lisa, don't understand all that, you know. So.
Right. And, you know, generally historic district commissions review applications for the entire building. Now, for the most part, it's what you care about is the exterior. So it's the exterior of the building, the components surrounding the building, the landscaping, things like that. But generally, like even in New York, they could care less what you do inside your building, but you know, you submit your application, you get your certificate of no effect, and
Yeah.
you're done with your life. But it's just the fact
Yeah.
that you've checked the box that they, you know, here it's the LPC
And-
has reviewed it, and
these benches were painted. These are the ones that go outside of the building, right next to the building, and so that was why they were brought to the attention of the Historic District Commission. So I just wanted to interject that. So
you know, generally if they're furniture, if things are furniture, that's not generally something that a commission would care about. If it's a permanent installation of a permanent bench, that would be something that would be reviewed by the commission typically.
Okay. Well, because these are kind of loud colors, kind of bright neon type of things, and that's why I kind of thought they should go toward that, because it kind of distracts from the building itself, I think so.
Right. Are they movable?
Yes.
Okay.
Anywho.
If the commission would like to review things like that, typically that would be something that would not generally be reviewed by a commission, but because it can go away. You know, it's not bolted to anything. Somebody might steal it. You know, you never know.
Well, I got a lot of grief over it, so.
Okay. Well, and that's another thing too, is that if there's community pressure on the Ramsdell, if they put these things out there and the Ramsdell's like gets a lot of community pressure saying, we don't like these, like you have to do something about them, then they can respond to that. But if it's furniture, you know, something that's not bolted to the ground, then I would typically let it go.
Okay, good to know for the future.
Yeah. Save you some grief.
I'm gonna get some neon benches outside the museum now. So.
So the Secretary of the Interior standards are the standards by which historic district commissions evaluate properties and evaluate the proposed work to the historic resource. There are 4 different standards that the Secretary of the Interior standards, or the Secretary of the Interior has, and so it's important to make sure you're looking at the right standard when you're reviewing applications. The 4 standards are preservation, restoration, rehabilitation, and reconstruction. And to give a quick overview of what those mean, preservation is when you are keeping something in amber. So like, say you have a building that needs to be stabilized, or you're not, it's like the least amount of intervention to a building. So say you are, let's see, maybe a good example would be like what I have here, the missions in San Antonio. There have been very little changes to these buildings over time. They've basically just been stabilized, and there's, you know, like no electricity, no running water, things like that. So that's preservation. Restoration is like what you have at Montpelier, which they are choosing to restore the building back to a very specific period in time. So anything that's not related to this specific time period goes away, and then they restore elements to replicate that period in time if those elements have been gone and they have the evidence that they were there. Rehabilitation is the standard by which historic district commissions follow. An example here is a project I actually worked on. It's in Jackson, Michigan, which is at the old Michigan State Penitentiary. It's called Armory Arts Village, and we converted the old prison into an artist community. So it's live work. There's apartments, there's studios and gallery spaces within the old prison. And then the 4th final is reconstruction. So Colonial Williamsburg is a great example of reconstruction. You know, when you go there, you think you're in a historic environment, but you're really not. You're in something that was completely fabricated in the 1930s based upon historic footings that they found and located, and used, you know, historic documentation to reconstruct all of these buildings that are there. So, so rehabilitation is where we're living with our historic districts in Manistee. And so a brief overview of these standards. It's kind of like the 10 commandments of rehabilitation. It's kind of how I view them. A few of them overlap each other. So we'll just kind of cruise through these, each one. So the property shall be used for its historic purpose or placed into new use that requires minimal change to the defining characteristics of the building, its site, and its environment. So the key thing here is minimal change to defining characteristics. So when you're evaluating a building, say you have a house, say we create a historic district with homes, and you have a teeny tiny little house and it has a chimney in the back, but that chimney takes up, 2/3 of somebody's kitchen, and they're like, no, this chimney's not used anymore. Can we take it down so that we can have more room in our kitchen? You have to look at the overall composition of what the front elevation with the public thoroughfare elevation would be, and does it make sense? Like, is that chimney really character defining? No, it probably will be maybe an arts and craft front porch, or maybe an oriel window on the front of a building or something like that. So it's weighting in, like weighting the element versus, like, is this a character defining feature of this building or is it not? And so when you're trying to figure that out, you can go to style guides. So if you have an Edwardian home, you can look and see what that means. What are really the character defining features that these style guides talk about, and then make your assessment there. So number 2, historic character of a property shall be retained and preserved. The removal of historic materials or alterations of features and spaces that characterize a property shall be avoided. So building on number 1, keep the things that make the building what it is, its essence, and then adapt, things that aren't as important to the style of that resource. And try to avoid removing historic materials, but we'll get into that one a little bit further down. Each property shall be recognized as a physical record of its time, place, and use. Changes that create a false sense of historical development, such as adding conjectural features or architectural elements from other buildings, shall not be undertaken. So what they're saying here, this one's pretty self-explanatory, but what they're saying is, if you're going to add on to a building, make it a building or provide an addition that is compatible to the style, but don't try to create that false sense of history, because we're not doing reconstruction. This is rehabilitation. So number 4, most properties change over time. Those changes that have acquired historic significance in their own right shall be retained and preserved. So sometimes you have buildings that, over its lifespan have had additions by maybe famous architects, or a famous person stayed there or made this addition to it, or you have a landscape that had, maybe it's Gettysburg and you've got these battle monuments in there. Recognizing those changes happen over time and that history builds over time is what this is asking you to do. So, while the Vogue, for example, may not fit within the overall context of Victorian Manistee, it's a prime example of art moderne architecture that is fantastic. And that in itself is recognized, as an important historic resource because of its exemplification of a certain period of time and style. And number 5, distinctive features, finishes, and construction techniques, or examples of craftsmanship that characterize a property shall be preserved. And that's pretty self-explanatory there. I don't know if we require any more explanation of that one. Number 6, deteriorated historic features shall be repaired rather than replaced. Where the severity of deterioration requires replacement of a distinctive feature, the new feature shall match the old in design, color, texture, and other visual qualities, and where possible, materials. Replacement of missing features shall be substantiated by documentary, physical, or pictorial evidence. So a few places where you see this standard utilized a lot is in window replacements or window applications. And in masonry work, a lot of times you'll see this. So in window applications, according to the standards, window replacement is very much frowned upon. They very much encourage window repair and restoration because their new windows really can't, they don't have the same character as a historic window. Even if you get the historic window from Colby or Marvin, it's never quite the same because of the new modern technology that, you know, you find within the sash and the frame and the weather stripping. So you'll have a lot of people come back and say, well, new windows are more energy efficient. Well, there have been studies that show that a properly restored historic window with a storm applied to it is just as or more energy efficient as a new window. So when you evaluate a building for new window replacement, it's very important to document all the conditions of the windows and to understand, is this actually deteriorated beyond repair? So that is the standard that's employed a lot with window applications. When it comes to masonry applications, say we're doing some repointing, or we have some brick that's been spalling and we need to do random brick replacements, or maybe we need to rebuild a corner of a building if for some reason. You want to make sure that your brick matches in color, texture, size, and that also the mortar matches in color, texture, tooling, and strength. So that's a very important thing when it comes down to with masonry buildings. You want to make sure your mortar strength is compatible with the existing mortar and with the historic brick, because that can actually break your brick if you install the wrong kind of mortar. So number 7, chemical or physical treatments such as sandblasting that cause damage to historic materials shall not be used. Surface cleaning of structures, if appropriate, shall be undertaken using the gentlest means possible. You see brick buildings all over the world, all over the place, having been sandblasted in the 80s. Everybody thought they were cleaning their buildings. This is great. But all you see are wand marks from where the sand is in circles, it's in giant swoops. And so that has caused a lot of damage to buildings. And when you take that bisque off the face of your brick, you essentially kind of ruin the brick. And your brick becomes more porous now because that hard baked surface that went through the kiln has been removed. So you want to treat your brick very gently, using 300 psi or less, which is essentially a garden hose. When you clean your brick buildings, you never want to power wash a brick building. That causes a lot of damage to your brick and your mortar. So number 8, significant archaeological resources affected by a project shall be protected and preserved. If such resources must be disturbed, mitigation measures must be undertaken. So, I mean, if you happen to come across an archaeological dig in your backyard while you're doing something, or say a building in Manistee, they're digging out a subcellar and they happen to find an old shipwreck, or who knows, like what you find under the ground. It could be anything. The work should be stopped. The archaeological review should happen if there's a significant finding in the building or on a site. So it's just kind of brings attention to that situation possibly occurring when you're doing work. Number 9, new additions, exterior alterations, or related new construction shall not destroy historic materials that characterize the property. The new work shall be differentiated from the old and shall be compatible with massing, size, scale, and architectural features to protect the historic integrity of the property and its environment. So this would be, say, if you have a historic building and you need to put an elevator addition onto it, or a, stairway or something like that. You would want to select an area on the building where it makes sense to put that circulation, but also makes sense to, it's least disruptive to any character defining features of the building. And then when you put that addition on, you make sure it's respectful to the historic building. So a good example of this would be the breezeway that connects Guardian Angels Church to the rectory. It's set back from the face of the buildings. It's smaller in size. It touches both of the buildings at just very fine points. And if you had to remove that addition, it could be restored back to its original configuration. So then building on that, with number 10, new additions and adjacent or related new construction shall be undertaken in such a manner that if removed in the future, the essential form and integrity of the property and its environment would be impaired. So that's the breezeway example as well.
Lisa,
Yep.
if I could ask a couple questions that are related to this. One of them has to do with that old car dealership. It's that that car dealership has some sort of a tile material on the exterior of it, which is badly broken in a number of places and apparently is unavailable at this point.
Mhm.
What's the best sort of procedure with that type of a situation?
This is 100 Washington.
Yeah.
Let me just see if I can pull up a photo of it. I'm not, is this the
The
old Manistee,
old
the high
boys.
school auto shop?
Yeah.
Yeah, it has the like pretty, well, probably was at one time that glossy fire glazed tile on the outside.
Is that tile or brick?
I think it's made to look like brick, but well, I don't know actually.
Thought
They
it
look
was brick, but I'm not sure.
That looks like a glazed brick.
so it's the actual building material.
Yeah. It looks like, I mean, it would be, I'm curious to know, because it looks like maybe on the south side, there's some spalling that's going on of the material. So maybe it's tile. It would be more apt to be brick. I mean, if it's from the 50s, a glazed brick, which might be available. And depending on the quantity that they would need for the project, they might be able to have a brick manufacturer make some for them. Or there's different coatings that are available now too, that might replicate the glossiness and colorway of this pattern. Now it does have a bit of like, it's not monochromatic. So you would want to have them provide probably 3 different color options. And so when the installer is doing it, they can kind of mix it up a little bit so that it blends with the building. But there are different coatings out there. So they could probably build back, if it's spalled, they could build back the face of the brick probably with a repair mortar, and then coat the face of the brick with a color matching coating. Are they proposing to completely just blow it out, or what is the proposal?
Yeah.
Like reclad it with a different type of brick?
Yes. To reface it with some sort of a brick.
Some sort of stone, yeah.
Yeah.
Brick or stone.
Blonde.
I would say that would fall under inappropriate, in that it needs to be repaired. But I haven't evaluated this close up. I wonder what's causing the spalling, or if it's spalling, I'm not certain.
I think it's spalling around those windows there on the east side.
The parapet seems to have some issues. Is there a bad roof on it right now? Probably. Like some bad flashing up towards the top, so water's getting through the wall, I bet. below the windowsills. They're spalling, it looks like.
And it's definitely, I think that Google Earth image is older, because I was just out there a few weeks ago, and it definitely looks worse.
That is 2015, so this is pretty old. I mean, if they're going to reclad it, I would ask them to reclad it in kind. They still make glazed brick. There's no reason why they can't. If they're gonna take down this brick, then they should replace it in kind.
The discussion when this originally came up was that that was prohibitively expensive.
But what does that mean? Can they provide a cost analysis? You know, like is this a difference of,
Whether you do it or not.
yeah. But you know, a lot of times, you know, as a commissioner, you'll have somebody saying, you know, pleading financial hardship, but that has a different meaning to everybody. And so typically when you do plead financial hardship, you have to show the numbers to prove that this is really financial hardship and that they're never going to make their return on this. Now, what I know of the city of Manistee right now is that the real estate market is booming. And this is a highly desirable corner. Is it really a financial hardship? So they're proposing to reclad it with something anyways. You know, can they provide to the commissioners the cost estimate from, you know, what is the material difference? Like,
This was done a few years ago, and I don't remember the details of it, but it's a project that was originally approved to actually replace what's there. Was not a unanimous decision of the Historic Commission, but it was approved. There isn't any current application on that building, so you know, who knows what will happen when it comes back up.
yeah.
The other one building that I was thinking about is, you know, the buildings across the street from, you know, the barber shop, the Fillmore, the Bluefish. They have that, what, 1940s or 1950s ceramic material, which has covered the front of the building, but the existing structure probably is 100% intact behind that. I suspect that the current configuration of the building is old enough to be historic in itself, but you might find somebody who wants to rehabilitate that building, who wants to take that off and go back to the original construction of the building. I just was curious about what do you think the preferred solution is to that? Going back to the original, or?
So the Bluefish is the old Lighthouse Brewery.
Yeah.
Is that right? And we're talking about the old Credit Bureau building.
Next to the old Credit Bureau building.
Okay, I think I recall.
Actually, Jack Pine was in one side of that at one point, and the Office Supply Place was in the other side of it. Both of those sides are vacant right now. So it's prime building because it has nice apartments upstairs that were rehabilitated, but the downstairs is nothing but vacant.
So this would be, as a commission, you know, if a new owner came and said, you know, if they did some probes and found that the original material was behind it, and then they decided to want to restore the building to its original configuration through researching at the museum or any, you know, historic documentation that they would have, how commissions that I've worked with in the past would typically deal with this is say, okay, but we want you to document the building as it currently is. You know, provide some sort of record to the museum of, you know, either through photographs or measured drawings, that this was its era in its, or what they would call it is its modern episode. So every building has episodes, and you kind of define these eras of the building's history. So you could allow the project to proceed as a, you know, you're doing a restoration of a certain era in time, based upon significant historic documentation. I think that would be allowable, but you would want to make sure you capture that period in time of it being a modern building, before you take that step back in time. Are there any other questions right now of the standards? Otherwise, I mean, like I said, I can answer any questions anytime if yep. More questions. We can move on to the next one. So it's already 5 o'clock. Oh my goodness. So, you know, examining the application. So typically it's the National Register nomination form that is the driving factor. Like that's how you base upon what's actually important. I know that there's been other studies that are published on the city's website that have been done of the downtown area. But when it comes down to reviewing the application, going back to that original nomination form is really where you start. Because if somebody ever wants to go for tax credits, everything goes back to that original nomination form, and that's what is considered appropriate or character defining features, and that's what's considered historic. So, you know, make sure that you're always referencing the original nomination form. So then when you're reviewing the application too, the applicants need to substantiate the claims for the proposed work. I believe at the time that the Vogue Theater was going through review, the reverse argument was made that the commission needed to prove that the fire escapes were historic in order to not be removed. And that's actually on the applicant. The applicant has to prove that those are not historic. And being that it's on a secondary facade on a public thoroughfare, and it explains how people exited a building, that it actually is a character defining feature of the building. So there's a little bit of gray area there. But whenever you have an application, you know, an applicant that comes in and may be not familiar with the process, and they want to do something kind of controversial, or remove a feature that, you know, may be considered a character defining feature, they need to prove beyond shadow of a doubt that it is not a character defining feature. And, you know, they might have to bring in professional experts, and, you know, historians or whomever, to kind of build their argument for that. But that is not on you. That is on the applicant. The museum is a wonderful resource for both the commission and the applicants, and, you know, for everybody to be reminded of that. If there's any questions that the commission has about historic features of the building, you know, Mark in the museum is a fantastic resource. Manistee has at its disposal. So then another thing too that I find is very valuable is that a lot of the commissions do site visits before applications are heard at public hearing. I don't know if that's something that you typically do. You probably do, you know, for some applications, but generally if it's something that's so important that it comes to public hearing, it's usually good to get a couple of eyeballs on it, with the applicant in tow, so you can ask them questions while you're there. There was one application that I had that when I reviewed it in Ann Arbor, a building that had been on, a house that had been on fire, and a commercial business owner wanted to buy it and tear it down. So we had to walk the house with the applicant and review it and digest whether or not this house was savable. And that was very valuable walkthrough that we had, exercise that we did with them. So I don't know if that's something you typically do, but it might be a good toolkit in your arsenal.
Now, Lisa, is that something you would do with the whole commission as a quorum, or no?
Typically, it was 2 commissioners.
That's what I had a feeling.
Yeah, and then that way they provided their report at the public meeting. These are our findings. And then the commission as a whole discusses it, the application is presented, and so you can come to a better conclusion. If it's a really important application, you might have more commissioners show up. I think one time we had 5 commissioners come to a walkthrough because it was a really important application, very contentious application.
We've done that in the past, had walkthroughs, and we've done it both ways with either the entire commission or else just maybe several members of the commission that did the walkthrough.
And it's really helpful, isn't it?
Yeah.
One thing I noticed on the website, it said that there's a 10-day review period. Is that for all applications, or is that is that all applications?
That's something I haven't dealt with yet, honestly.
I actually don't know.
Yeah, I'd have to.
Typically, Lisa, Zach, in the past, with Denise Blakesley, it's always been like they've had to have all their information to the commissioners 10 days prior to the meeting.
Is that really enough time?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's in certain projects, it's probably not,
So I don't know if that may be a revision that the commission may want to consider. As long as we're kind of reviewing the ordinance to make things clearer in terms of violations, the review period may want to be examined, and maybe look at other commissions and find out what they're doing of comparable sized cities. In New York City, they process, I think, 90,000 applications a year here. So they have many different levels of review. There are applications that you can get reviewed in 2 weeks and get your certificate of no effect. But then anything that comes to a public hearing, oh gosh, that's minimum 3 months, because you have to go through community board, you have to get your application and your materials into the LPC well in advance, because there's a huge public review period here in the city, which I find very helpful. And even Ann Arbor on some level has a public review period, and they offer public work sessions. So for particularly challenging applications, there's a photo of a work session here from the Ann Arbor's HDC, where they gather and are talking about an application and how can we reach an agreement before we actually get to public hearing. So,
most of the time, kind of what happens here to probably about half the things that half the applicants that come to the museum are like, I've heard I've got to come to before the Historic District Commission. When's the next meeting? Well, it's on Thursday, which is like 4 days from now. Oh, do you think I can get on the agenda for it? No, you can't. You got to wait. So people here are very ill-informed, and they don't know anything about the process and think they can just hop on board right then and there, and be ready for it, which I, of course, tell them no, so.
Yeah, and it's a tricky thing, because
it's tough, yeah.
People to be on board with historic preservation, so you don't want to make them feel stupid.
Oh no! I'm paraphrasing, of course.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it just might be a PR move on the city's website, or to kind of be like, here's our schedule. Please submit your applications. a month
Yeah,
prior to
yeah.
the meeting that you're anticipating on participating in.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So that's kind of
Yeah.
a system that I know is here, I think on their website.
Yeah.
They
And
tell you.
and whether 10 days is enough time, I mean, I don't know. I guess that's up to the group to decide whether enough that's enough to, because certain projects, they, like you said, there's a lot of factors involved. So, you
Yeah.
know,
And it could be a 2-tier system, easy applications. Of course, you want to paint your house a certain color, or you want to change the color scheme on your storefront. That's easy. But
yeah,
if you
absolutely.
build a new building in a historic district, that is not enough time.
No,
And
yeah,
you
I
can't,
agree.
you can't tell them a specific time period, because this is the type of project that should undergo public scrutiny, because it impacts the entire city and the entire community. So that's something that may want to be considered. So here we get to challenging issues. We can probably go a little bit quicker because we talked about violations earlier before we kind of started this presentation. So I guess we can kind of skip over this slide. Oh, but the fun thing here is the house I worked on in Brooklyn. It started out with a violation. So the left-hand picture was where the building started. The violation this building had on it when the new owner, my client, bought it, is that at some point in time, somebody had replaced the front door without a permit. And the LPC deemed that front door inappropriate. So in order to get the building permit to restore the building to what you see on the right-hand side is the final product, we had to go through an entire violation review, and he had to escrow money in order to make sure the door got replaced. But you know, it happened, and this is a tool that you have in your box that when reviewing the ordinance, you know, requiring an applicant to put money into escrow when a violation is issued, so that way, if they fail to actually complete the work, then the city can step in and complete the work. Demolition by neglect is a big one, and is really its own presentation, but basically it's willfully neglecting your building to kind of skirt around historic preservation. So, and a lot of times a building owner will plead the financial hardship argument. So this is where, when you plead financial hardship, you have to have the documentation to back that up. Because there are very legitimate cases of people who may have owned a building for 80 years or whatever, and they've fallen on hard times and they just can't keep up with the roof, and that leads to water infiltration and things that they didn't see, they didn't know about, and they just don't have the financial means to actually, you know, take care of the work. So there's a certain time and place to plead financial hardship, but generally that is not the case. It just might cost you more money, and costing you more money is not a financial hardship generally. It just, you know, is not the most pleasant thing in the world. So a lot of communities, and to kind of deter people from demolition by neglect, will take more of an affirmative approach to it. So say in a historic district, there'll be community standards and guidelines for maintenance. And in a sense of encouraging building owners, you know, to maintain their buildings on a regular basis so that they don't fall into those pitfalls of over lack of maintenance. So that's one thing that we can kind of look at, and when, if there's, you know, I think there's a few buildings in downtown that might, I don't know. I don't think that they're purposely planning to demolish them. I just think that there's other things. So there's a lot of, before you accuse somebody of demolition by neglect, there's generally a big story to kind of slog through and figure out what the problem is, and then you can reach an answer or conclusion of what's actually going on here. So it's a big kind of trigger word there. And we'll end on stewardship and community. As you know, to kind of reinforce the positive work that you're doing, is that you are stewards of Manistee's historic resources and our cultural heritage of Manistee. Manistee is such a unique place in Michigan and the United States. At the turn of last century, Manistee was the wealthiest city per capita in the entire United States due to the salt mining and lumbering industries, which is why we have this treasure trove of high Victorian, Edwardian architecture that just is unlike anywhere you see. I mean, you see small cities along the lake shore that have beautiful downtowns and small little, residential areas, but Manistee is like solid through and through, from its blue collar housing down towards Manistee Lake up through the more beautiful lumber baron mansions. It's all consistent in its storytelling and its logic, and it's what drives the heritage tourism to Manistee. When I was an undergrad at Lawrence Tech in Detroit, I spent a lot of time at Kinko's because I was an architecture major, and we did a lot of photocopying those days. And so I can't tell you how many times I would see people with making calendars at Kinko's, and they had that goofy Manistee Victorian Port City sign in their calendar, like their family calendar for the year, because they had taken a trip to Manistee and took a picture of the sign and put it in their calendar. So it truly is important work you're doing to preserve that visual identity that is actually what Manistee is known for. And that, to encourage the community to participate in historic preservation, to embrace our heritage as a lumbering and salt mining town, I think is something we shouldn't forget, because it's our roots, and it's why Manistee is so important. And as a commission, continue to nurture and develop programs that involve the community, maybe expand the plaque program or kind of reinvigorate it. People like to be recognized for hard work, and taking care of any building, regardless of its age, is very difficult work. And to know that that's appreciated by the community in general, generally encourages that positive behavior and towards embracing historic preservation. So that brings us to our conclusion for today. We can talk more about any of the topics here or any other questions you may have.
Thank you, Colin.
Nothing from you, Mark? Or Lee?
I got nothing back. No, thanks, Lisa, for all of your knowledge and for helping us out with all this stuff. It's great to have you as a resource.
Anytime. Seriously. Well, Mark has my phone number. He knows where to find me.
And,
I'm on the board of
and
directors at the museum as well. So.
and why I think it's so important, especially to have Lisa helping us out with this, is that in the past, the Historic District Commission has had people from downstate come and give a tutorial or kind of go over some of the stuff that Lisa kind of went over, but they don't know Manistee. They're just brought in as a consultant. Lisa lived here, has ties here. Her folks live here, and she has all this knowledge of Manistee. So that's why it's so vital, I think, to have her on board and to kind of guide us through these things. So I think it's great to have her. So I'm glad she's able to help us out.
So, and feel free to, contact me as a resource anytime. Because most commissions do have an architect or more on the commission, but I understand that in a community of the size of Manistee, it's very difficult to find people that can fill that bill. And so if you ever have any questions about well, what do you think? What would she do here? You can float them past me and I can provide you my opinion. My opinion is not the only opinion. So, but at least you can kind of have an opinion of a person who's been practicing in historic architecture for, a quarter of a century, almost.
One would think in a town like Manistee, which has such a vivid history, that people would realize the value of historic preservation. But what we find in Historic District Commission is a lot of people see it as an irritation.
It's true.
They just want to do what they want to do, and the hell with it.
You're not alone. That's kind of the sentiment across, in most commissions that I've dealt with and worked with.
Years ago, the Manistee had a building authority, and I was on the building authority. And one of our tasks was to see what to do about the city hall, because the city hall was becoming increasingly obsolete in terms of intended use. And one of the commissioners, we just need to build a pole barn for the industrial park. Thankfully, the building authority convinced everybody that should be restored, and now it's a showplace in the community. And I think everybody can be really proud of it. Was it more expensive? Probably not in the long run, but like we don't keep track of the externalities. It was already there. We didn't have to make the bricks and the cement blocks again. So.
And a lot of these buildings can be showplaces for sustainable strategies. So, every time I see the old junior high building, my heart breaks.
Yeah.
Because you could load that roof up with solar panels and put geothermal wells throughout the old football field, and that building could run itself. You could probably take it off the grid with how much energy it could generate. And for just a little bit of, most of the asbestos was abated anyway. So in the 80s. So that building breaks my heart. That was a very much a lost opportunity. And I'm always hopeful that there will be some future and forethought given to that building, because I think it's a very special building in the city.
Well, I think that the school buildings have been a perfect example of purposely
Demolition by
ignoring, demolishing by ignoring everything. And now we're in the possibility is there's a $32 million bond issue coming up. It's very frustrating.
Mhm.
I just want to say, Lisa, thank you. I'm stretched thin here, to say the least, and with the hindrances of the contract and everything, being able to lean on you on some of these finer details that I don't want to say I can't care about, or because it's not the truth. It's just I don't have the time to really dive in and figure out what the nitty gritty is on it. So to be able to lean on you for that is extremely helpful, and your presentation is awesome, and I'm really glad I have that on hand at least now to reference.
I'll
So
send it to you. I'll send you a copy
that'd be awesome. Thank you.
so that you all have
My late night reading.
it. There's a lot of late night reading.
A lot of late night reading, yes.
All right, I think I'd like to declare this non-meeting adjourned. I'm actually missing another Zoom meeting right now that I'm supposed to attend, so.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you all for coming. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Take care, guys.